take our feedback live. Thank you. And hopefully we'll have Mr. Sillo in the room shortly, who, Mark, you and Rich know Paul from, you must have been in the House, and Senator McCormick, were you all together back when Act 60 got passed, et cetera?
Rich and I were.
Yep.
Well, Rich and I were in the, Senator Westman and I were in the House when Act 60 was in almost ready, well, 2 years short of being ready to go.
Okay. Well, okay, so it's 10 o'clock and we're starting the feed again. This is the second half of our session, Wednesday morning, February 10th, of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. And we're welcoming to the room Paul Sillo, who's Vice President of the Energy Efficiency Institute. So we've been talking about how to undertake weatherization at scale, as well as lately we've been talking about it in a broader context of how do we also deal with transportation needs, and also, especially for low income Vermonters, how do we provide an even broader view of working one-on-one with them to address all these intersecting energy and financial challenges. For the committee's purpose and for our guests. So one thing is, I think we have, by virtue of the governor allocating funds to do increased work on energy related savings and weatherization, there is an appropriation being in the recommend. I, as usual, part of what we'll do as a committee is to be examining. I don't want us to assume, no one should assume that the governor's recommend becomes exactly what we pass. We might, we would evaluate that and see if we think it's the best way to make progress using that amount of money. I mean, that's always the foundation. So I just wanted, I don't know if we've said that out loud amongst ourselves yet. We're not just saying, oh, we're here to rubber stamp that. We're going to evaluate that proposal. The second thing is that funding. So the governor has bought us some time by injecting one-time money into the system, but we know from the Act 62 report and others that the most pressing thing for us is to identify adequate, sustainable, long-term funding and mechanisms to get the job done. My sense is that the bill will probably, here's what I would recommend to the committee we consider, is that we create a working group that works during the summer and fall to vet some of the many different proposals we've heard. The silver buckshot approach to funding weatherization. We're not looking for the one sort of killer app that's going to pay for everything. We're probably going to have multiple funding streams, and what would they be? How would we set them up, and how would we manage them? So that doesn't seem like something we will sort out between now and crossover. And it feels to me like, given that we have one-time money, that we could have a working group that would help deliver by the beginning of next session a solid answer for us to take the second step on. So all that lead in is to say, I'm not expecting us to say, okay, we were looking for a way to pay for this or do all this work. Bang, we've seized on that and we're done. I think we're still assembling information and figuring out what the options are. And one of the things we heard about very briefly when Bob Barton was in the room with us roughly 10 days ago was the concept of pay as you save. And it turns out we are fortunate that right here in our neighborhood, there is, we have people who are expert in the pay as you save strategy and have experience in it for decades. So I asked Paul to come in to educate us on what that kind of program looks like, how it works, And then I think for us, we'll be thinking about how that could fit into a portfolio of work to move forward on the energy savings work we're trying to do here. So a long introduction, but I just wanted to say out loud some things that have been kind of in the background in the last week. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Sillo. Good morning.
Thank you, Senator Bright. It's good to see all the familiar faces on the Senate Natural Resources Committee. Good morning. I should clarify that I have been my role in front of the legislature since I served in the House has been primarily as the president of the Public Assets Institute. And so this is the first time actually I've been in front of the legislature in it wearing any other hat. And so I want to give you a little background about this other hat of my role with the Energy Efficiency Institute and my work in energy, which has mainly been the work that I've done the entire time I was in the legislature and before. So it actually started in, and I won't belabor it, but I just want to there's a couple of reasons that I think it's useful in this conversation. In 1978, when I was 24 years old, I was hired by the State Energy Office, Vermont State Energy Office, to set up the Home Energy Audit Program, which was the second home energy audit program in the nation. The first one was in Massachusetts. And none of us knew what a home energy audit program was at the time. It was, it was very early in this whole energy efficiency world. And I ran that program it was a partnership with the UVM Extension Service, and we had 75 energy auditors that I was responsible for working around the state. I ran that for 2.5 years. And that was also the time when I met my current Energy Efficiency Institute partner, Harlan Lackman, who was running a weatherization program for BROC, the Bennington Rutland Opportunity Council. And we later both joined, when we left those jobs, we both were in a firm called Energy Solutions that I was involved with starting, and we sort of crawled through mostly sort of commercial buildings, schools, hospitals, that sort of thing in Vermont and New England. And then we dissolved that in 1988 and started the Energy Efficiency Institute, just the two of us. And so that's, I go through that mainly to say that I'm going to talk about how we develop PAYS, but the work we did to develop PAYS in 1999 was based in having done, excuse me, on the ground work with energy audits, with crawling through buildings, doing calculations, writing reports for all kinds of buildings and building owners, and watching the difficulty of actually getting those reports to result in installations and what the barriers were. So when we got to the background on PAYS, Pay As You Save, was that Harlan and I were trying to figure out, would it be possible at that point? Essentially, all the programs were either, and it's still typically true, they're either rebate programs where a utility offers 30 or 40% or some amount to a customer to install measures that pay for themselves over their useful life, or a loan program where the customer has the opportunity to get a low interest or even no interest loan. And so a lot of people still were not taking that up. They had very low take-up rates with both of those strategies. And so we had the question, what if we could design something that was so attractive to consumers that they would not want to say no? We actually said an offer too good to refuse, essentially. What if we could do that? And that's what we did when we worked on PAYS. And we were actually consulting with Burlington Electric at the time, even though Burlington Electric has never done a PAYS program. That was really our work with Burlington Electric, what had a lot to do with where we ended up, thinking through the elements of what PAYS would look like. So essentially, what the offer to the customer, that's too good to refuse, excuse me, is one where you essentially say, a utility, says to their customer, we'll install cost-effective energy efficiency improvements in your home or business. You pay nothing up front. You have no debt. You don't have to go through a credit check or anything. You just because it's not a loan, so there is no debt, and you only you pay a charge on your utility bill that's lower than the estimated savings by a reliable third party, and you only pay as long as you continue to be a customer at that location. As soon as you're no longer a customer at that location, the charge goes, automatically goes with the new customer who takes over at that meter location. So essentially, it eliminates the problem that rebates have of the customer having to come up with the 60 or 70% costs to pay for the measure in order to get the 30 to 40% the utilities offer. It eliminates the debt problem if somebody has kids in college or is still paying off college debt themselves, or they have other home improvements they want to make that is not competing with their other priorities in terms of debt. And we also were hearing it was a problem with elderly people saying no because they felt like, well, I don't know how long I'm going to be around, so I don't want to put money into this. So essentially, it eliminates all of that so that a customer has no reason to say no to an offer like that. And what we found is that, in fact, most people don't say no. They actually, we have 50 to 80, we've seen in the programs around the country, 50 to 80% take up rates. In other words, when people are offered, they get 50 to 80%, depending on the utility, say yes. And the PAYS has been operating since 2001. The first program was in New Hampshire. The Public Utility Commission in New Hampshire ordered the two largest utilities, the New Hampshire Electric Co-op and then Public Service Company in New Hampshire, that's now Eversource, to operate a PAYS pilot. And then after the pilot period was over, they ordered them to continue the program. So since then, we've had, or as of today, there are 9 states that have had PAYS programs and 19 utilities in those states. And there actually are more coming on now. Including, by the way, water programs in California. California was, as you know, was experiencing drought, and the legislature stepped in and sort of ordered water utilities, municipal water utilities, to cut back on their usage. And so they wanted an aggressive program. And so there's a group of programs in the Bay Area that are now, have been using pay as you save as a way to reduce water consumption. They also do energy, but they're water utilities, and they offer, they offer it on these terms that I'm talking about with PAYS. So a couple of, I think, key points. One is that the utilities that have been the most interested in PAYS have been co-ops. There's a series of co-ops in southeastern United States that have, and also the Midwest, that have been, using PAYS. And I think, and I think one of the main things with the co-ops is that because the owners and you could think of it as the shareholders and the customers are the same people, that you don't have that tension between customers and shareholders. There are investor-owned utilities. The first one, as I mentioned, in New Hampshire, and also that recently there are some large investor-owned utilities in Georgia and Missouri that are initiating PAYS programs. So that's sort of the background of it. And I'm wondering if maybe I should just stop there and see what questions this raises, and I'd be happy to sort of take the discussion wherever you'd like.
I think the thing that I've talked to Mr. Sillo in the last week a couple times to learn more before today, and I think the part that was sort of the biggest surprise to me was there's not necessarily any inherent connection between the utility running the program and the measure you're doing. So that became clearest to me when you talked to me about California, where it was an electric utility running the program to save water. So it's just that the utility already has an established relationship and the ability to manage such a program. And
well, actually, it was the opposite in California.
Oh, sorry.
It was the water utility that was that was working with the customer to save electricity. It's the same idea,
Right.
but
right.
it was.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was the water utility that was initiating it.
Right. And so, I mean, I think, thank you. Sorry, I got that backwards. And thanks for correcting me. The interesting part is that to me was where us thinking about that the utility delivering the service would have to be, well, it creates a new opportunity. I guess that's what I'm thinking. And so in this case, what's the advantage of having, can you talk a little bit about why the utility is, suitable or equipped to become an actor in this way?
Yeah. So essentially in order to do this thing that we were talking about, to create this offer that customers could say yes to, you need an entity that has a relationship with customers that essentially allows us to tie the charge to the meter. And so if you're not going to have, and this was actually the innovation of PAYS, is that you're not tying a charge or an obligation to an individual customer beyond what they currently pay, their obligation to pay their monthly bills. So all they do is pay their monthly bills, and the assumption is that the bills are lower because the estimated savings are greater than the payment amount. So the utility, and I would say even the electric utilities, are especially qualified to be in this role because they're ubiquitous. Virtually everybody. I mean, there are, I believe, still some people that don't have electricity hooked up to the grid, and especially now that some people have gotten off the grid. But most people are tied to a utility regulated system through their electric system. And so that's why, for example, in Vermont, gas is only regulated gas is a very small slice of the state. So, certainly in this conversation, electric utilities would be the ones to be involved. And essentially what the obligation of the electric utility is to find the money, and we can talk about that, find the money to make the investment in the customer's home, and then to collect the charges to recover that cost over the life, something short of the life of the useful measure from that location. So, so to do that, you need this system, a tariff, essentially, that when we call it a PAYS tariff, that allows it's a voluntary tariff that a customer signs on to, but once they sign on to it for that location, when they leave that location, somebody taking service who has gotten notice that this is the case with this location, takes it over and is responsible for making the payments, keeping in mind the payments are estimated to be lower than the savings they're getting. So so that's why the electric utility, I think, is the tool. And also the electric utility regulatory system is the vehicle. So the problem with, for example, consumer loans is that you then involve banks, you involve, consumer credit rules and all that, and also the courts in adjudicating that make it more complicated for people to participate. That's why they have credit checks and all that sort of thing. So in this case, when you use the regulated utility system, you not only get the tariff that can apply to multiple customers at the location, you also get disconnection for non-payment as a remedy for not paying the obligation back. I'll point out that the history of pays at this point with 5,000 homes at these 19 utilities, $40 million invested over, the past 20 years with mainly pilot programs. The result is better than 99.9 payment rate for pays charges. That's better than actually the utilities average payment rates. So that the issue about would people not want to pay if they were a successor customer at a location has not shown to be a problem over the last 20 years. I addressed the issue of utilities, but I've also sort of broached the issue of capital. So I want to talk a little bit about capital if I could, because I mentioned that the utility is paying for the installation of these measures. A contractor goes in, installs the measures, and then the utility actually pays the contractor, and then the customer or the tariff charge at that location allows the utility to recover its cost, 100% of the cost. So where does the money come from? And so the answer is it depends on the utility, on how they want to go about it. But what's happened is, for example, with one of the water utilities that we worked with in California, they were prepared to just get money from a bank, where they had a line of credit, use that line of credit and use it to pay for measures installed in their customers' homes. But what they ended up doing was they realized that and we were working with them on this, that they had reserve funds that they were investing independently, and that they could invest in their own customers and their own reserve funds, which they already had, and that this was a reliable enough payment stream that it was a good use and responsible use of those funds. So that's what they did. They used their reserve funds to pay the upfront cost, and then that fund, and they tacked a rate of return onto it. And generally, we recommend that we keep the rate of return that affects the customer's charge at 3% or less, or the cost of money at 3% or less. So that's one way that it's happened. In other cases, utilities have used their capital or used existing line of credit to get funds. A utility we worked with in North Carolina was the first utility in the country to take advantage of the USDA's energy efficiency and conservation loan program, and which was low cost money that goes to co-ops through USDA or to rural areas actually. And that was 4 years ago, and they're just now in the process of renewing their application to continue that loan. So that was how they did it. So there's a variety of ways that you can get money, but the point is that it's a reliable payment stream. Pays provides a reliable payment stream for whoever is providing that money.
Great. So just to make sure I have the mechanics down, if my old electric bill was $100 a month, utility sponsors, pays for a contractor to come in, they do the work. Now my electric bill goes up to $125 a month, but the design, the assurances based on the home energy audit and the measures recommended, you would anticipate would be greater than that $25 a month. So you're not tying it exactly to the oil bill, but you're expecting, for instance, my oil bill should drop by at least $25 a month. Is that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there's two things in your question that you're asking. One is about this all fuels approach that you talked about earlier, and also how the savings show up for customers. So I'll address the first one first, which is that we recommend, and actually most of the programs that have been operated have been all fuels program, which means the electric utility puts the charge on the electric bill, but that they're also saving propane, gas, oil, whatever other fuels may be in play for that customer. In other words, they're going into the home and doing measures for all the energy use in that home, not just the one that they're supplying. And the reason they would do that is that it's a customer service. It's actually, now it depends. Regulators can also tell them they have to do that, but or the legislature can say that that's how it has to operate. But it's also a customer service. You're in somebody's home and their biggest use is oil, but you provide electricity for lighting, refrigeration, maybe water heating, and you say, well, sorry, we can't touch that other stuff, but you're there and it could all be done at the same time. So and that would be a service to the customer to do that. And then the savings would show up on those other energy bills. So you could have a case where the charge is on the electric bill. In this case that you mentioned, the charge could go from the electric bill could go from $100 to $125, or maybe with the electric savings, it goes from $100 to $120. But there's a $25 charge on there, but that the bulk of the savings show up on a different bill for the customer. But that needs to be made clear up front, and it is in the agreement and in the conversation with the homeowner by the program operator. So that's
Great.
yeah. So that's the sort of the all fuels and the savings. I should mention that when we talk about the savings being greater than the charges, that what we do is we have what we call the 80% rule. And the 80% rule says that the charge on a customer's bill cannot be greater than 80% of the estimated savings from a reliable third party. So in other words, we want that the 20% to be sort of a net gain. We want an immediate improvement in cash flow for the customer. And that the term of the charges cannot be more than 80% of the useful life of the measure. So in a 15-year measure, the term cannot be greater than 12 years. And those are both serve as incentives for customers and also as a hedge, so that any errors, that estimating is not a exact science, although you can do, estimating savings can be done better than, in some cases than in others. So we're very careful about the estimating process that we use. We actually use an engineering analysis or encourage the program staff, program operators to use an engineering analysis. We require it actually, so that customer, that you're actually analyzing that home for that customer for the savings that are going to happen or are likely to happen there, not savings on average that would happen in the state of Vermont or the state of Georgia or whatever.
And can you say a little more about the third party, who, so it's someone who's basically, I guess, neutral in the whole, a disinterested third party is doing the audit and analysis?
Yeah. So, yeah, for example, you don't want to have the contractor doing the assessment or the analysis and reporting the savings. In some cases, the utility can be that party, third party, but in most cases, what they do is they hire a program operator who's not the contractor and not the utility, and that third party does the assessment and oversees the installation, does the inspection, and authorizes the utility to put the charge on the bill. I'll say that we have currently the third-party organization. You may have heard of eUtility from Arkansas. That they've been doing most of the program operator service for utilities in the country. And they're actually now even working with the water utilities in California. But they were primarily working in North Carolina and Tennessee, and but recently they're the program operator in Georgia and Missouri. So
And who's that again?
It's e-utility. It's energy efficiency utility so it's EETILITY, and they're in Arkansas. You may have heard of them. Tammy Agard is the CEO.
Okay. Senator Westman.
So Paul, who would you suggest, these companies that do it, the water companies in California, or I think did you say New Hampshire Electric was doing something? Whose program could we look at, and what materials do they give people to explain what this does?
It's a good question. We have, so let's see, I'll answer the last part of your question first, which is that we, over the last 20 years, we being the Energy Efficiency Institute, have developed an array of sort of intellectual property, things that have evolved over time. It's generally not marketing materials per se, but it's for example, it's contracts, various contracts that are needed. It's notice to successor customers, that sort of stuff. But in terms,
how do you get them to sign up and buy in?
Yeah, we don't do that. We do license our IP to utilities that are interested, and actually we have licensed our license, meaning that they can use, that they run a program that meets the PAYS essential elements and minimum program requirements, which are on our website at eeiVT.com. And then licensed to actually use the intellectual property that we've developed and sort of as with the program. So when e-utility is working with Georgia Power or with Ameren or Evergy or whatever, or the utilities in California, they bring with them the license to use the materials that we've developed over the last 20 years. So now that's not, you asked about marketing materials, and different utilities have done different marketing materials. I don't know that we've collected those, but we do have some, and I could actually dig around and see if I could.
I'm just interested in, how do you say to the membership of a water district or a utility, or that, how do people know about this, and what do you tell them?
Yeah, okay. So I want to be clear, we don't run programs. So we're not program operators, we being the Energy Efficiency Institute.
I'm saying just generally,
yeah,
how people buy into this and learn about it to buy in.
Yeah, I understand. So what has to happen is the utility has to decide to operate a program. So the utility, looks, for example, in California with the water utility, in your example, there's pressure from the legislature. There are standards the water utilities have to meet in terms of lowering their consumption over time. And so the question is, they have different strategies for doing that, and PAYS is one of those strategies for those utilities that are using PAYS. So first of all, the utility would have to decide, we want to use PAYS. The second thing they would have to do is decide on who they're going to use for a program operator. And what's happened in California is after initial pilot phase, there's now a consortium that has been put together. Let's see, there's a consortium that's been put together called BayREN that actually is handling a lot of what a large utility would normally do. So they're trying to make it easy for small water utilities, which are municipal, to sign up. So they would have to sign up, and then the BayREN group is actually contracted with e-utility So they have a program operator, and then they just they're providing sort of a package arrangement for including marketing materials for that utility once they decide that's something they want to offer to their customers. So I guess the answer to there's different ways in, but it almost always involves the utility or a consortium representing a group of utilities deciding that they want to pursue pays, and then work with a program operator and go from there. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
Because,
I'll try again.
so if Washington Electric or Vermont Electric, you have two, because you said it's been a lot of co-ops.
Yeah.
So Mark or I wanted to, our company, our electric company goes to participate. Your, how do the members who need to do things in conjunction with the company to access this benefit, and the benefit's so good that we can't say no, but how do we know about it?
Okay, fine. Okay, I get it. So you're talking about once the utility decides they want to offer this to their members, how do they let people know about it? And the answer is the same way they let people know about other programs that they're offering, so that they would do bill stuffers, they would do they could do actually what we recommend.
I get that. What do they say to them?
Or what do they say to them?
And so that's what I'm asking you. Do you have some examples in these companies of what they say to people?
Yeah, that would be the marketing materials, essentially.
I guess I'm unclear. That's what I've been trying to get at.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I don't know that we've collected up the marketing materials, but I think we do have some examples, and I could dig those up and get those to the committee.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we have some, or even if we don't, we can we can contact the program operator and just get you some, so you can see what they're saying and how they're saying it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Be happy to do that.
Great. Thanks for that. And along the same lines, are there, maybe you don't want to do this off the top of your head, are there people operating pays programs, electric utility-based pays programs that are doing things related to energy that you might suggest that we talk with as a committee to hear their thoughts on how it's going, and things to keep in mind if we were to try to set up such a program?
I'll get back to you on that one. I mean, I think I'll think about that. I think there's two parts to it. One is what's a good utility that actually represents that issue, and also somebody that's likely to be available to actually talk with the committee. So I can get back to you with some suggestions. Great.
And I think, probably just two references is enough for us to learn some more, but thank you.
And I should add, I didn't say this earlier, but we haven't done, I mentioned that, I haven't testified in this role in front of the legislature, but we actually haven't done much work in Vermont. And most of our work has been out of state, and it's really just a question of where there's been interest. And so we haven't been pushing this anywhere. It's more, it's at the point now where people hear about it, they contact us, and they want to sort of, know how do you get something started. So that's sort of appears to be happening in Vermont now. And so we're doing what we would normally do in any state with Vermont.
Sure. Great. Senator McDonald.
So the question, I think it was a question about, should we start this program? Is this a program that is started by the utilities, and the law has to permit the utilities to engage in such things? Is it the utilities that start the program, or is it it's not state money that goes into this, or is it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The utility, the programs can be initiated from a variety of sources. The utility has to buy in, obviously, for one reason or another. They're going to, because they're a player, they have to buy in. So they, in some cases, in many cases, the utility is the one to initiate it, take a rate case to the commission and say that they want to do a pays tariff. But oftentimes it's because there's been a group in the state that has been pushing it, and in some cases they've opposed a rate increase, on the part of the utility without an efficiency program, and so the utilities agreed to do a program. And that's typical with any kind of program over the years. That was similar in New Hampshire. But it could start, the legislature could start it, the commission could start it, a utility could start it, whatever. It doesn't really matter. What I will say is we did a study, and I mentioned this to Senator Bray when we talked, that we did a study in collaboration with Pace University Law School Energy Project. I don't remember the exact date, but it was a decade or more ago, for VEIC, the Energy Investment Corporation, about pays and whether what the legal foundation was in Vermont for a pays program. And at that time, we found that there didn't need to be legislation, that the commission had the authority to issue a pays tariff. Where commissions have ruled on this, their basic finding is that a pays tariff is an essential utility service, and as such, the commission is authorized to initiate or they can authorize tariffs on that grounds under existing statutes. So I don't think there's a need for the legislature to authorize the commission any further than they already are. But there may be, depending on the design of a program in Vermont, because we have so many utilities, and it's unlikely that they're all going to go to their own program operator and run their own program and all that. I think probably something more like that consortium of California water utilities that I was talking about is appropriate in Vermont. So, so there may be things that the legislature needs to do depending on how the program is designed in Vermont. I also want to be clear that PAYS is not a program per se, it's a system.
Yep.
So programs need to be designed using the PAYS system, and that they're different. How the programs function and have to be thought through. But it's just that they can't compromise the essential elements and minimum program requirements in order to be considered PAYS.
I find myself sort of reluctantly asking this question, but I'll go ahead and ask it. And that is, given how attractive this program is, why do you think it hasn't been taken up more broadly? Like what's limiting it so far?
I think, well, first of all, you have to think differently to do a PAYS program. That if you've been thinking the way when I was involved with efficiency in the 80s, you were thinking utilities need to subsidize, measure installation, and they were pushing rebate programs at the time. And there's still, a lot of what is offered now is just sort of variations on what was developed in the 1980s. But you have to think differently about it, because really there's three ways other than PAYS, to sort of get this work done that we've done. One is that have been done nationally. One is rebate programs, I mentioned earlier. One is loan programs. And the third is weatherization programs that essentially pay the full cost for low-income residents. They all have problems. And the problems I mentioned with the rebate program and the loan program is a lot of people, particularly low and moderate income people, can't take advantage of them because they don't have the cash or they don't have the debt capacity to take that on. The other is renters can't do it because of split incentives. You know, that the renter that pays the energy bill and the landlord that owns the building, you can't get together on getting the benefits and the investment lined up. And PAYS addresses those problems. And the third problem is with weatherization, it's great if you can afford to pay 100% of the cost. It's just that you can't get many homes done. So what you end up with in every state is very long waiting lists. I mean, really long waiting lists, 50 to 100-year waiting lists for people to get work done on their house because so much money is required on an appropriation basis to get it done. So what PAYS does is essentially for any customer, it allows you to move ahead with getting investment in energy efficiency to happen without requiring large appropriations. And I think that that's an important consideration as you're thinking about, you know, how the pieces of these programs fit together. That's not to say there aren't appropriations that could be useful with a PAYS program, because one of the things a PAYS program does is it doesn't capture every measure that would be cost effective over its useful life, because the standard is what is cost effective enough to allow a customer to reap immediate net savings. And that's a different standard. So if you wanted to have, so we make the distinction, what's in the customer's interest versus what's in society's interests. And PAYS takes care of what's in the customer's interest. But if you want go that extra step and say, well, this is in society's interest to have every measure that would pay for itself over its useful life, then you may want to appropriate money to sort of buy down the cost of the project so it can qualify as PAYS. But that's a lot cheaper than giving everybody a rebate or, you know, whatever. So anyway, that's part of the thinking that would have to go through. You don't have to do that to run a PAYS program, but if you want it to be comprehensive, that's an option. And that can be done by the utility, essentially putting that cost on all ratepayers, or it can be done by the legislature with an appropriation. So anyway, there's a variety of ways that, you know, once you get down in the weeds of program design, that has to be worked out. And that's really going to be up to whoever's, you know, working on that.
Right. So I don't want to sound negative. I'm going to keep
Oh,
scratching a little.
Oh, why has it
Well,
not happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think one reason, my long-winded answer, one reason is that it's not the way most people, most evaluators, most program operators, you know, most utilities, most advocates were thinking. It just, and honestly, it just takes time for new ideas to filter into the conversation. It's been 20, you know, for a long time of this 20 years that we've been sitting developing this. There's been a lot of interest in the last 5 years. A lot of the stuff I've talked about in terms of programs have happened in the last 5 years. And mainly climate change has pushed people to sort of question, why are we not getting into more houses? And so then when you start looking at what the obstacles are, they go to PAYS. But I think, you know, of the studies that the national labs have done, that a lot of, you know, people have done, they've criticized PAYS for not being comprehensive enough, essentially. But our argument is, okay, you can have a comprehensive program that reaches a few customers, or you can have a less comprehensive programs that reaches tens of times more customers, hundreds of times more customers. Which do you want? And I think, you know, to some extent, people have gotten tired of the slow pace of this choice. I actually think you don't have to make it. Doesn't. I think it's a false dilemma, actually, for the reason I described. I think you can do both, but I think you need this sort of PAYS element to not make it so expensive that it scares, you know, legislatures or, you know, the public even, or ratepayers, that because it requires so much money that, you know, it's not justified. So we're looking at how much of this cost can actually come from the people who benefit at a location. And we push that as far as we can, and then say, okay, the rest of it you can get from other sources, but it's a lot less than what it would otherwise be. Is that, am I getting closer?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Senator McDonald.
I immediately comes to mind that you can have an extremely comprehensive program that applies to EVs, or you could have a less comprehensive program that applies to 92% of the gas operated automobiles. And the less comprehensive program would have more fossil fuel savings.
Impact, right. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but if that were true, that would be the case, yes.
This is a theme today.
Yeah,
that
right,
started
right.
before you got into the room.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was the case, right.
Okay, you're experienced on the well, that is helpful. I mean, because and let me ask one more question. Has anyone who instituted a PAYS program decommissioned it at some point? And did you do a post-mortem on why they stopped offering it or didn't take the pilot and go to scale?
Let's see.
Well, and I asked that because we might want to use that experience to design from the get-go to avoid putting a pilot into some sort of predicament that could undermine it, you know?
Yeah. Well, a couple come to mind, but not, this isn't a total answer to your question, but New Hampshire Electric Co-op kind of, they did a pilot, but it sort of never got off the ground. That was one of our first ones, and they had management changes within the co-op in the middle of it all, and there was just sort of chaos, and it really never got off the ground. So I think that was a case where they started it, but it didn't really go anywhere because management didn't embrace it, and they didn't continue it as far as I know. In Hawaii, we had that was a case where the legislature ordered the commission to do a PAYS pilot with solar hot water, which they did. And the commission wasn't happy that the legislature ordered them to do it. And they did a 3-year pilot. They had the utilities, a certain amount, they allocated a certain amount of money for these installations for solar hot water systems. And the take-up rate, and they had some take-up rate that they were anticipating. They had to shut down the program after, it was a 3-year program. They shut it down around 2 years because they ran out of money. They actually used their 3-year allocation in 2 years. But then they never continued the program. And Harlan probably could tell you more about that, but I think there was really tension between the commission and the legislature about that sort of got in the way. I think the program evidenced that it was popular among the people who were offered it, but it was, there were problems within, and Hawaii has had false starts since then with trying to, they had change of administration and, all that. And then there was never really sort of a commitment to continuing. So that was another case. So I don't know, actually, other than that, of a program that was actually shut down. Certainly nobody shut down because they finished, they got all the customers, that were interested served. One of the limitations, actually, of a lot of these programs is how much money the utility allocates for these investments. And this was the case with Public Service Company New Hampshire, and with, I'm now Eversource. We were expert witnesses in that case, in the rate case in front of the commission. And the Public Service Company New Hampshire cleverly argued that they wanted to take the system benefits charge allocation, and instead of using it for 30% rebates, which would essentially get you 3 times that amount of activity, they wanted to use it with pays and use it for the total cost of the measure, which essentially cut how much activity they would have to a third, and then plow the money back in, as they received it back, plow it back in. We opposed that strategy because it actually, it was a way for the utility to sort of cut their sales losses. They were afraid that the program would take off, that too much efficiency would drive sales down, and then they would be in a position of having to seek rate increases that would be tough to get through, and that their customers wouldn't like. And so they were trying to soften that by dampening down how much activity could happen. We've seen that with a number of utilities, particularly IOUs, where they limit how much capital they're putting into the PAYS program to sort of keep it from taking off. And so we take that as, if you want a program to take off, if you want to talk about something where you're getting 100,000 homes done in 10 years, that it's actually possible. But we haven't actually seen anyone allow it to do that.
Right. Well, it strikes me that with our RES now being 5 years old and the grid being 63% renewable in general, and the whole beneficial electrification movement, growing, and tier 3, it feels like there wouldn't be that sort of inherent friction, because if part of your weatherization and more comprehensive measures includes your weatherizing and installing a cold climate heat pump, for instance, for the utility, the positive side is they're building beneficial load. Same thing if they were supporting transportation at that same site. So it doesn't have to just be load loss through efficiency. It could be positive, beneficial load growth if we were structuring things well. Senator McDonald.
Mr. Chair, you and Paul Sillo bring up one of the inherent questions. When Vermont's energy efficiency program has reduced the amount of electricity that the utilities sell by something around 15%, and no investor-owned utility in its right mind is going to consent to that sort of loss of revenues. And I believe we changed the law, which said to the utilities, you are no longer going to be you're no longer going to be limited to earnings based on how much electricity you sell. We will restructure your earnings so that if you can sell less electricity to all throughout Vermont with the same reliability and the same level of service, we will give you a bonus in profits, that you will earn a profit for selling less electricity. And the Vermont customer will be better off. That's the public good. You, the utility, will earn a greater profit by doing this. And that was the key to Vermont going from the highest electric rates in New England to the lowest over a 20-year period. Mm-hmm. What Mr. Sillo has just shared with us was that apparently the investor-owned utilities or the co-ops in the examples he gave perceived their situation as being a losing situation because they were not they themselves didn't gain as a result of the consumers gaining a lower price. So I think that tipping point is hard to grasp, and based on what I've just said, probably even harder to understand.
I thought that was pretty clear.
Well, Mr. Silo sometimes has the unique ability to make those complicated things realizable.
One thing I'll say is that there have been changes that we've noticed over the last 5 to 10 years, well, probably 5 years, with things like the utility in North Carolina that we worked with Roanoke. They actually had a generation and transmission wholesale supplier that was giving them, because of just the way supply was working, that gave them credits for reducing load at certain times, reducing peak and that sort of stuff. And so they ran a pays program, and they calculated the credits they were getting from their G&T, and then gave some of those credits as a way to increase the amount of activity they could do with their individual customers. They assigned a certain amount of that to each customer location and said, we can do this, we can buy down the cost of your installation by $2,000, let's say. And so instead of being a $7,000 installation for a home, it would be a $5,000 installation, meet the pays requirement, and then the customer is paying based on the 5,000, not the 7,000. So that's a way that's happened over time, and that's evolved over time with the co-ops. I honestly don't know that I've seen that with IOUs yet, but we're kind of we haven't seen that much IOU participation. We're about to, because as I mentioned, in Georgia and Missouri, there's now going to be, large IOUs involved in this, which will be instructive about, how this works. I want to mention one other thing that I didn't mention. I did talk about low-income weatherization, but and I did talk about renters. Pays allows renters to briefly. Pays allows renters to install measures. So they pay the bill. They don't need a credit check, whatever. All they need is the landlord's approval to say, can we upgrade? Can I have Efficiency Vermont or whoever come into my apartment and upgrade and do upgrades? And the landlord doesn't pay anything. The landlord just signs off, and then that can happen. And so that's actually opened up a market among renters. The other one is low income. One of the interesting things about this net bill approach is that in cases where a low income customer is eligible for fuel assistance, that if the customer has a lower bill, even with the additional charges, fuel assistance can actually help pay for the charges that are part of the bill. And so it's a way to have fuel assistance not just be maintaining the existing situation and not waiting for 50 years for a weatherization crew to have enough money to be able to come to your house, but can move ahead and use fuel assistance to pay the bill and actually be improving their property, improving their home. So it's just there are things like that are built into pays that make things possible that aren't currently possible. And I can't go through all of them, but I think just to give you a feel for it, that there are potential breakthroughs, for using this tool.
Right. Yeah, that last one, is I was thinking, if you take, sometimes cases become more clear if you take it to an extreme. So if it turns out that you're down to the last LIHEAP customer in Vermont, you're not going to deliver $19 million worth of fuel to one customer. So along the pathway from 60,000 customers to one, how might you repurpose that money if it's allowable to do more permanent work of the nature you're talking about, like helping them, maybe the measures become more comprehensive by virtue of supporting those customers that are eligible.
Yeah, it's a great question. I can't give you an answer off the top of my head, but I think, what you have there is a case where LIHEAP is an allocation based, it's really an emergency need allocation. And so you don't want to compromise that agenda.
Right.
You want to make sure that the people, however the priority system works for emergency need, that needs to stay the same. I think what's different is that if somebody is low income and eligible for LIHEAP, that's going toward a lower, if that can be going toward a lower bill that they didn't have to put any money up front for, and that the utility is getting their money back, their cost recovery back, that's a situation that's kind of a win-win situation, where you can make the LIHEAP money go further because you have lower bills, and you can also make it easier on the customer because the customer is getting support to pay for these charges. But even without LIHEAP funds, low-income customers that are paying less on their bill are paying less on their bill. And so that's less is better in this case. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, point well taken. Right. I want to be careful that I'm not saying anything about criticizing LIHEAP, but I'm just thinking long-term about the ability to to use that money in a way that's even more beneficial, while making sure that everyone has, as you say, emergency fuel is always available. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a thought that could go into a program design. I just think, you have to be careful not to compromise the values of the program, the essential elements of the program of LIHEAP.
Right. Well, I think and since it's federal money, it comes with constraints. I think right now it does allow, though, that up to 25% of LIHEAP monies can be expended on weatherization, and Vermont, I think, has selected 15 as set for itself 15%. It's my recollection. So there's already a little bit of splitting going on, and it might be that weatherization component, fits into again to what you're saying about more comprehensive versus less comprehensive measures, especially if it's public dollars. Maybe that shifts a little bit of the balance from just what's in the customer's interest to broadening it some to say customer plus societal interests. All right. Well, plenty of food for thought.
Yep.
Thanks for all that. Any other questions for Mr. Sillo, Senator McDonald?
I still haven't gotten an answer to whether or not Paul has an electric oven or a gas oven.
Right. It's still gas, Mark.
So when things go bad, you have the ultimate solution.
All right.
That goes back to a 1994 inside joke from the Ways and Means Committee.
Okay. Well, offline, I'll probably get to learn more about it. All right. Well, and so Paul, we've asked loads of questions. Anything that now that you think about it, that you didn't get to that you wanted to share while you were here with us this morning?
I think I pretty much covered it. I would say, we've worked with a number of entities, organizations, whatever, that have been, working on legislation. We're actually working on legislation in Colorado right now. And the only thing I would say, I would caution you about legislation, really kind of getting a picture of what the program is before you try to take it on in legislation, because legislation can actually hamper program implementation if it's not done well. And I don't mean done well like well written or whatever, but I mean that you're actually hitting the point that where you're going, that there's broad agreement or whatever, where you're going, and that the legislation is you've done the work of sort of understanding that where the legislation is needed, and that you have the elements to get you there. So it's just, I don't know how to be clearer about it. It's just complicated. We've had states that have passed legislation that really have not been good for the long-term effort. And I just, so it's just a caution to, I think, there's it's going to take some thinking and sort of broad agreement among the parties who would actually need to implement this to step forward, be involved, and sort of get this designed. So I would just say keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Just speaking for myself, I think what we've been talking about is not just a 10-year program to really pick up the pace on this work, but my own sense is that it's we're thinking about 10 years to make sure that we're creating a period of certainty so that interested parties will feel like it's a safe investment, it's worth staffing and training for. They can count on there being an opportunity to do this work. And we've heard that fits and starts have left some Vermont actors with a bad taste in their mouth because they staffed up to do more, state monies receded, and then they have to do layoffs and stuff like that. So we really want to avoid that. But I'm guessing we're talking about decades, plural, of work, and
it's crazy.
It will be, and also, as I was saying at the very outset, my sense is that addressing the funding and money issues will be something that a work group could sort its way through this summer and fall, so that we arrive while we have money in hand. We could do that work group so that we come back next January with a well-vetted answer, and we would have had the time, for instance, with all the utilities that would have to be interested in this. We haven't had a conversation yet with utilities about a pays-like structure. So, but it's good that you're getting us started thinking about it carefully and thinking about it early.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me in. I appreciate the conversation, good questions. And I promised you a couple of things. One is some sample marketing materials, and also a couple of electric-based utilities that are doing pays that might be willing to get on with you and have a conversation. So I'll do that and get back to you.
All right. Thank you very much for
see you. You're welcome.
Coming in.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. So committee, we are gonna our next originally planned guest was a contractor who I think is head of like the Home Remodelers and Builders Association, Mr. Bradley. But since he's works out in the field when he's not talking to our committee, something came up on a job site and he had to cancel. So something's happening out there, and we will reschedule, which means that we're gonna wrap up a little. We'll wrap up now, where we have finished with our witnesses for today. And I just want to thank people for, I felt like there was more discussion in today's, with our guests this morning than typical. And I felt like it was very productive between looking at a broader and yet deeper connection to the people we're trying to most help, and as well as finding another way of thinking about how to fund stuff that gets us out of this perpetual shortage of funds by making it possible for utility to take on the work on behalf of everyone. So any other committee comments, notes, new business, old business? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So we are we're on the floor at 1 o'clock today, and tomorrow's Thursday, LCAR day. So we don't start until 9 a.m. Tomorrow. And we're actually going to hear from Bob Barton, who first mentioned a pays-like concept to us, is coming back in with a group from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C., which works on the issues we're working on and has some expertise, and they're willing to. So we'll learn what they have to offer and see what there is, learn what's there, and then go from there. And that's it.